Welcome everyone, it's Chobra. Now, you might have noticed that I have been spending a lot of time with Path of Exile 2 ever since it went into early access launch just a few weeks ago. Now, I didn't play Path of Exile 1 much. I actually bounced off of it several times, mostly because of the burden of knowledge and the overwhelming passive tree and whatever else that was very complex in the first game. But ever since I got to translate for Jonathan Rogers, the game director of Path of Exile 2, I've been enamored by this game and its design. Everything ranging from the visual design, everything on the surface, all the way to the actual combat, whether it's the skill system, the passive tree. It all felt a lot more approachable, but also just as enjoyable and a whole new playground to explore. So I dove right in ever since early access launched, and I've been spending a lot of time trying to learn the game. I don't just mean getting better at the game, but learning what the game is about. Now, I don't have any overarching review or anything like that just yet because, again, especially not having much experience with POE 1, I want to make sure that I've experienced everything the game has to offer and from different angles before I make any conclusive thoughts. But there's a lot of discussion going on already. Obviously, it's early access, so the feedback is very important, and there are a few things that caught my eye that I've been wanting to talk about. Path of Exile 2 is not NOT a Souls-like. It's not a Souls-like ARPG. It's not a Souls ARPG. It's not a Souls RPG. Well, no matter what combination of words you want to use there, it's not it. And it's very important to distinguish this. Now, I was wondering where this came from. Where did this narrative come from? And I did a little digging, and obviously there's a lot of content out there about Path of Exile 2, so I can't say I really dug all the way into the depths of history ever since it was first mentioned that the sequel was being developed. But I did come across this article where the game director, Jonathan Rogers, talks about how they want to take PoE in an Elden Ring direction. Now, you got to be careful when you look at these quotes because it's a very different feel when you just read it like that, like, oh, they want to go Elden Ring, because that can mean like, oh, we want to go 3D open world, right? It could mean that we just want to make it really punishing. It could mean a number of things. But if you look at the interview itself, that context comes from them talking about Diablo 4. And he mentions he thinks that Diablo 4 is going into a MMO direction in regards to cooldown focused combat, whereas they want to take the Elden Ring direction of meaningful, engaging combat. And the way I interpret that is like every action matters, right? Every action is a choice that changes how the rest of the combat goes. Whereas MMO combat, as someone who enjoys MMO, I get exactly what he's saying. It's about finding a cycle and then you click through on different cooldowns and it kind of turns into a rhythm game. And that's cool and fancy. I love MMOs, but it's a very different style of combat. Since that time, a lot of people have been referencing Souls and Souls-like, and yeah, the combat's tough. It's all about the combat and the combat. And obviously, GGG themselves, Grinding Gear Games, they focused on combat as one of the main marketing tools because that was the big difference between this game and a lot of other ARPGs, especially compared to the first Path of Exile. And that's okay, but I think it's important for us as we're now experienced in the game and giving feedback about it and engaging in discussion to recognize that that's actually not the core loop. That is a method. That is a means to an end. But that is not actually the end. Whereas I would argue that a lot of Souls-likes, or let's say something like Monster Hunter, the combat is the end, right? That's it. That's the game. It's about learning the combat and getting better at it and growing from it. So let's talk about how that's a little different. So Souls-likes, obviously Souls-likes are very deep. You can't kind of do a one-liner on like, well, Souls-likes are, this is the design. Because when you do that, that's when we devolve into, well, it's got tough combat and cool bosses. But like, that's not true. Like the original Zelda was pretty hard for its time and it had some cool bosses, but I would not argue that that's a Souls-like per se. There's a lot of other factors that go into it. But I would argue that Souls-like games, it is about overcoming the difficulty by learning from experience, right? It's about going and dying and learning the pattern, going, getting a bit further, dying again. Now, sometimes it encourages you to explore and use the environment. The environment gives you these tools, or it gives you a different option to get around this. Sometimes you don't have to fight the boss. You could argue, okay, it's about exploring and overcoming difficulties. Now, you can get creative. But what I'm trying to say is the game has everything already there. Everybody has the same tools. And it's about overcoming them. But when it comes to creativity, I would say that's a very cool aspect that the Souls games do very well. And not all Souls-like do that, mind you, right? I would say the FromSoft games do that quite well, but not every game is very successful at the exploration and the creativity of like builds and tools. But at the end of the day, the core loop is go in, die again, try again. But as you're doing this, you're gaining experience, you're gaining souls or whatever it might be in that certain game, and that makes you stronger pretty much automatically, right? Because you can get stats, just straight up flat stats to make your character stronger with that experience. You can buy extra tools, extra items, and things like that. You can upgrade your weapons. So it all revolves around just go kill more things, and then you'll get stronger. And then you'll learn the patterns, and then you'll get stronger. So again, you have options. You could explore. You can make a challenge for yourself to make it tougher, right? By using only certain weapons, only certain moves. Or if you're not very good at the game, you could just go grind experience by fighting a bunch of the monsters you can kill, and then just coming back a lot stronger, so each of your hits just chunks the boss a lot more. You have these options, but it is about going, dying, trying again. And finding ways, like finding what actions you can take to overcome that. That is the game. It's kind of similar in Monster Hunter, right? It's about learning the patterns. It's about learning windows. It's about learning your tool set to overcome it and then get stronger gear. So now you can activate the same tool sets again. Monster Hunter fans love to talk about how you just get stronger, right? Your character doesn't get stronger. You get stronger as a player. That is the core loop. So in those games, to me, combat is the end. Like, that is the game. Now, I look at Path of Exile 2. I love the combat, by the way. I love it. I'm not a huge fan of, like, cooldown-based combat in MMOs. I love MMOs, but I much prefer something like, say, Lost Ark, where it's, yes, there are cooldowns, but it's much more about your positioning and your movement and your actions and whatever else it might be. So that kind of real-time combat. I love that they went that direction for Path of Exile 2. But to me, that's a means to an end when it comes to Path of Exile 2, because the core gameplay loop is actually still about RNG loot. It's about getting random loot and getting excited for that, 1-2 times that it tickles your brain with something fancy, something new. Or maybe you're in the super end game and you're like, oh man, I got that like 2% extra damage. And that's exactly what I needed to just get just a bit stronger, and cut my time on this boss or push that extra tier on the Atlas, whatever else it might be. And this comes in the fact that the loot is all random, right? I could get the same item as you and the stats would be random. The mods are different, but the numbers on the mods are different. It's all about, do I get the ones I want? Now, you have choices as a player. Like, you could always chase for the optimal build. You could be playing solo self-found, right? Which is the mode where you don't trade, you're not able to party, and so you just deal with your own loot. Maybe you're doing that because you like the challenge, or maybe you do that because that keeps you chasing for the optimal builds and you keep grinding away, whatever else it might be. But maybe you like trading, and that's your way of saying, okay, well, I want the item that I want. That's an agency that you have as a player, and we can get into a separate discussion about whether that's balanced right now or whatever else it might be. But that is the core loop. And this is important because that affects everything. That affects trading. That affects drop rates. That affects the combat. That affects bosses. That affects the endgame Atlas loop. But we have to remember, it's not actually about the combat. The combat is a means to get to that loop of go out, hunt monsters, find loot, get excited, hopefully, about the 1 or 2 drops, and then you go again. And if you didn't get it, now you have tools to, hopefully overcome that, whether it's like selling it, whether it's trading it, whether it's disenchanting it, whatever else it might be. So why is this important? Because once we look away from it, you stop making those comparisons of, yeah, but if you're going to go Souls, like, you have to remember that we can pick up experience after we die, or that there are bonfires in the middle where you can upgrade, or the dodge roll, it can do this or that, it can phase through certain things, the iframe is longer. It's about finding that timing. One of the first things I had to learn, in fact, because I love figuring out like dodge rolls and abusing iframes in combat games, was that that's actually not what the dodge roll is for in this game. That's not how you're supposed to think around it. It is about dodging, but there are much more specific scenarios to be using it, right? And it works it benefits you in very different windows, and more people are catching on to that. But we have to kind of pick up on, okay, well, that's not what this game is trying to tell me. Now, do I like what it's trying to tell me? Maybe not. And maybe not enough people like it, and so maybe that direction is something they need to change. Again, I'm not saying that the vision is perfect and we can't criticize it, we just have to learn it and accept it, but I do think it's important to remember that, okay, well, what is the intention here? And I think that's important to remember. The other reason this is important is because I've had people drop into my stream and ask, so what's this game about? Right? Maybe they think it looks cool. It looks pretty. Maybe they think the combat looks nice. The combat looks fun. It's great to watch. And they're wondering, so why do you play it? And some of them might be hoping that the answer is, well, just because the combat is sick. My combos are amazing. And that's part of it, But the real reason you're playing it is to collect gear. Now, I would argue that the campaign alone is good enough to enjoy if you just want the combat and learning new combos and upgrading your skills. And just, you finish the campaign and you're like, okay, cool. I'm not all about the whole RNG loot thing. I don't enjoy that. I don't enjoy trading. But the campaign, that looks fun. I want to try that. That's great, especially because on full release, the game is going to be free. I would actually argue, let's say Acts 4 through 6 come out during early access. The length is probably still a decent value at around $30 US. So I would argue that it's still worth a shot if that's what you enjoy. But I do like to remind people, well, it's about the loot. It's about going out and picking up random loot, organizing it, selling it, or crafting it, whatever else it might be, and then revolving everything around the randomness that you get from the loot. So it's not a Souls-like. We got to stop talking about it like it's a Souls-like. I think that'll help all of us give better feedback as well, but also wrap our head around how to learn the game better as well. A good example is if you're new to the game and you're early on and you get to the first boss of Act 1 and you're dying, and if your first complaint is, well, the boss is just too hard. Like, the mobs weren't that hard, but the boss is just too hard, and I can't even, grind experience. The experience doesn't matter, right? I can't upgrade my skill gems. I'm not saying that some of the feedback around skill gems is bad. Quite frankly, I didn't play POE 1, so I don't really have a direct comparison. But if you're simply saying, well, I'm not really given any options, that would be wrong, because you could collect drops and upgrade. Now, maybe you get really unlucky, and those are the very unfortunate parts, right? Maybe you don't get anything, but there are, the merchants in town and things like that. And does the game do a good job of telling you, that you should check in every now and then? There is a loading screen tip, but maybe you didn't catch it. So these are other discussions, but actually the tools you have, the main tool you're guided to use is, well, have you upgraded your gear? Have you upgraded your passive tree? And maybe sometimes your passive tree really sucks, although I think they did a pretty good job of fixing the early portions where you can't really go wrong. Like, it's going to help you one way or another. So these are things to consider. Once you have that, then the discussion around drop rates or magic find or trading, that can all have a lot more meaning. What I will say, and where I think they really succeeded, is that they did make the combat engaging, and they did make it a great tool to overcome the difficulty of the game. And here's how I found out, because I'm a person who engages in the combat a lot. And I once had someone drop into the stream, and we were talking, and I was talking about how I was like, okay, I think I got to upgrade my build a little bit. I got to find some new gear. Maybe I got to go on the trade website. Maybe I got to buy some new gear. Or maybe I got to fix my passive tree, because I'm still tinkering with my own build. And they looked at it and they said, they were watching me play, and they said, well, quite frankly, it's kind of miraculous that you're not dying more, because you're actually just overcoming that with your reactions and dodging and avoiding taking damage. And it was like, okay, so the combat is working. It is another tool. That might not be how you want to beat the game, and that's fine, because the core way to beat the game is to get better gear and get a better build. But hey, that option is there for those of us who enjoy it. So take comfort in that the combat, I think, is mostly working as intended. Sometimes it's buggy. The whole melee hitbox thing, yeah, that needs to get fixed. But overall, the intention is coming across. I think we just need to remind ourselves that this game is still about the loot. And if you're playing Path of Exile 2 right now, hope you enjoy, hope you have a ton of fun looting, hope you're enjoying trying different classes, trying different builds. I'm having a ton of fun with it. I will be grinding away and trying to wrap my head around the game a bit more to share my thoughts further. And also because I'm newer to the game, but also I'm hoping to introduce this game to more newer players. That's the type of viewpoint we'll be taking in the future as well. On that note, if you are playing Path of Exile 2, I'd love to hear what character, what classes, right? What ascendancy, what build are you using? So let me know down in the comments below. Hope you guys enjoyed this little food for thought. Hope it allows us to engage in the game better and the discussions around it. And for now, that's going to be it. I'll see you guys next time.